Alex, how are you?
Good. How are you?
I'm doing great. So I know I am not alone, and like many of us know you from being in front of the camera. And so for you, what is it about directing in general, but specifically directing a documentary that was so intriguing to you?
Well, I came up kind of doing both at the same time,
Mhm.
starting even as a kid. So I've always sort of seen it as one creative blobby thing. You know, doing the acting and doing the writing and directing has always been kind of a thing I've all done together. But I have always been interested in culture and where culture is going and how society is changing. And most of my documentaries reflect some aspect of that, whether it's about technology or not, um, or people who are caught up in kind of a sea change of culture, which is what happened in the case of, say, Frank Zappa, for
Mhm.
instance. So um, I've made several documentaries already about the rise of internet-based communities and my interest in the internet and its impact on society and culture goes back to the beginning of the internet in the 80s when I got online, before the web.
Mhm.
And it was very obvious to me how much cultural impact the internet was going to have, and I got very involved in online-based communities like the BBS Usenet group organizations back in the '80s, where everyone could talk about anything online, and it was what we're seeing now was going on then in the '80s, just like 40 years ago. Um, you know, a lot of diversity, a lot of people talking about gender inequality, a lot of people talking about radical politics, and I found that really fascinating because these are people all over the world. And that just grew and grew and grew and grew as the internet expanded. And now you end up, where we are with YouTube, and you have by far the largest congregations of human being on any one platform. Number one search website in the world is Google. Number two is YouTube, both
Mhm.
owned by one company. So the influence is almost unimaginable. It's almost impossible to describe. And sometimes I'll talk to people and they say, "Oh, I don't think YouTube has much influence because all you ever hear about is Twitter and Meta." And I'm like, "Well, that's by design, right? The company is so powerful, has so much lobbying power. It's very good at keeping the spotlight off of itself." And so that's why it felt like high time, and not in a negative way necessarily, but just in general to stick a spotlight on
Yeah, and it is kind of wild when you watch this movie to recognize how much has already happened since you have finished this with uh YouTube, as it were, because there's been like four different controversies post the end of this movie. I was like, well, four things happened last week that would
it.
have
Yeah,
been included, like had it kept going. And so how
yeah.
did you kind of like find a way to navigate something so vast and ever changing as YouTube in this while still making it clear, like, hey, here's the points I'm trying to hit. And even though, like, yes, I know by the time this comes out, something is going to have happened, like a ukulele apology video or whatever became the next big thing.
Okay, well, the ukulele video is our sequel, so I mean, we're not going to ignore that. But um, the uh, the thing is with all these movies, I come from a narrative background, so I'm very, I'm trained in story and I'm trained in
Mhm.
character. So I'm interested in human beings and their story, which makes it usually very easy for me, or easier, I would say, because none of the stuff is easy, to not get lost in the weeds and to focus on a specific story and tell that story. And I also am a big believer that you can't possibly swallow the ocean in one gulp, right? And YouTube is so vast, which, you could tell a story just about kid influencers. You could tell a story just about the influencer battles that are going on right now. You could tell a story just about, the rise of DIY culture or whatever. Um, I had what I tend to do is I had a vision for a certain group of people that I went after that I knew would have a very pivotal view of this platform, either from inside like Steve Chen and Susan Wojcicki, or from the ground up like Anthony Padilla
Mhm.
and Natalie. Natalie went from ContraPoints to the people who are fighting battles there, like Kerry Goldberg and Andy Parker and such. So once I got my hands on those folks and they began to talk, a story emerges from there, and I craft story around that with my editor, Wes Cadwell. And so that bookends you, right? Like And
Yeah.
in narrative, that's always the case. You got a 3 act structure. You got to get in. You hit certain story beats. You got to get out. And I don't have a problem killing my babies. So I'm always pretty good at just saying, this is the story. Whatever's not happening within the context of the story is going away. In docs, that will change, obviously, because you find a thread of a sweater and you pull on it.
Hmm.
So, like the story leading to the Jan 6 insurrection, that happened as I was going, because it became very evident to me that not only had YouTube done all this incredible good stuff in terms of diversity and breaking down barriers and allowing people, whoops, something going on over there, allowing people around the world to have a voice who didn't have a voice, people in different parts of the world, people from different, of different genders and ethnicities and sexual identities to have a voice. That was really important. And at the same time, I realized that you wouldn't have had Jan 6 without YouTube.
Hmm.
That was really the driver of information dissemination and incitement for the group that ended up coming together to raid the Capitol. And so it was incumbent upon me, I felt, to focus kind of the whole, let the movie lead to the kind of explosion that was 2020 with the rise of COVID disinformation, anti-vax propaganda, the rise of the far right, the rise of white supremacist terrorism, and YouTube's role in that. Sort of became a driver of the back end of the film in tandem with the other positive aspects of what they had done.
Yeah, because I was going to bring that up because you are very vocal online about like your hatred of Donald Trump, which I always loved. I was like, yeah, Alex Winter. But like I do love too in this movie how it is set up as like, well, YouTube has to be kind of impartial. Like they can't say one person is right and the other is not, and how quickly it switches after everything that happened on January 6th and like the accounts they're willing to shut down. Which it was always attributed to Facebook did that, but YouTube let people like Alex Jones and that Crowder guy always kind of have those platforms and could say whatever they wanted. When you are working on that like narrative structure as it is, where it is like you have the information of someone saying like, oh, YouTube has to remain impartial, and then knowing like you kind of have that as like the bookend. Uh, did you like know that going in, like you wanted that bookend to end with the January 6th thing, or was it just kind of through hearing those comments into what you knew happened?
It was the latter. It was a narrative evolution. I absolutely did not
Mm-hmm.
go in with that in mind. I went in with an open mind, and still have a lot of respect for everyone involved
Mm-hmm.
and YouTube. I think the people who are at Google are really good and really smart people, and I think the people at YouTube likewise. I just think this thing has gotten away from them a little bit, and I think that to your point about the both sidesness, I don't think it's incumbent upon any company to platform, violent terrorists, right? So that's not, but you can't both sides terrorism, right? That was what was, immediately ludicrous with Donald Trump and the Charlotte riot.
Mm-hmm.
Was, this is not two sides. This is a violent, hate-filled mob that is trying to get people killed, and then there's the people who are being victimized by them, and those are your two
Mm-hmm.
sides. And it's pretty black and white. The problem that we have with the rise of the web and the internet is that the basic monetary capitalist business structures and models that have been implemented are old, and they're based on much smaller scale platforms. So YouTube has basically employed your sort of bog standard ad based model, which is great, for certain types of businesses. But when you're a platform that literally contains everything on the planet that is being consumed by everyone on the planet all around the world by the billions every day, well, maybe monetizing someone who's calling for Mike Pence to be hung from a gallows in front of the
Mm-hmm.
Capitol, maybe that's not your best business model, right? So I think that's kind of it's sort of an arguable thing when you see it. And, film is very visceral. Like to see this thing played out like that was very shocking, even for me and my editor. Like we were sitting and cutting like Jan 6 against like the rise of this information happening on YouTube. And it's kind of sick making. Like it really hits you pretty square in the stomach. And again, like I don't lay this all back at the feet of the company. other than to say that we have mechanisms in place in the way our business models work where they're not even in a position to police their own company. They couldn't tame
Mhm.
Frankenstein's monster if they wanted to, because their shareholders would fire them the second they decided to stop driving profit, which is what would happen if they deplatformed all these people, which is why they've been very selective about who they deplatform. Steven Crowder has not been deplatformed. He's got millions and millions and
Mhm.
millions of followers. He's making a pile of money. And he recently, not long ago, called for civil war on his channel. And there he was making, monetizing YouTube's ad dollars. So I think it's a big problem, and I think it needs to get addressed. I don't think it's easy, but I don't think you can just say it's hard, so we shouldn't do it at all.
Yeah, I agree. As someone who got, the fire of Ben Shapiro one time because he didn't like a headline I wrote, I understand.
Well, I
But
hope you
like,
did the right thing and debated him, because that's all you had to do, right? Just
yeah,
debate him.
just
Yeah,
had to debate him and
that's
be like, read the article. It's a trailer right up my dude. But
exactly. Yeah, that's so silly.
but I do with like the topic of the internet and like you exploring it through documentaries, it is like I said earlier, so ever evolving and changing. Is there any topic that you've already covered that you do want to kind of dive back in a further documentary, or just like seeing where it's evolved since you've already kind of talked about it? Since, like we said, everything changes every 5 minutes, so whatever you do the next day is different.
I think that the most significant thing going on online right now is Elon Musk's purchase of Twitter.
Mm.
And I think it's probably too. I'm sure people are making docs about it right now, and they should. And more stories that get told about it are the better. So I wouldn't disparage anything, but I think it's too soon to quite assess the level of damage that he's caused. But it's really vast,
Mm-hmm.
and people have died because of it, and the world has become less democratic because of it. So I just don't think you can understate the wreckage that's been caused by an anti-democratic oligarch or autocrat like that with a political agenda, which I would argue YouTube and Google do not have a political agenda. Elon has been very clear about his agenda, and he voices it constantly. He's openly anti-democratic, openly anti-trans, and is fanning very violent flames on that platform. So I think that that's the most significant change to the world since we stopped shooting our film. And I think that, you know, to your point, obviously major changes. Susan left, but she was never going to stay as the CEO of YouTube that long anyway. But she's still one of the most powerful people from Google's history, and will always
Mm-hmm.
be. She instigated the YouTube sale in the first place. So I think a lot of things have changed, but I think the core issues that are in our film are still absolutely the core issues that are happening today. I think only with the exception of Elon, and that's something that we've all known was possible. We talked about this in my Silk Road documentary, Deep Web, when we were talking about the need for services like Tor, hidden services, and why the darknet was an important place.
Mm-hmm.
While there are bad things that happen there, going very back to the BBS Usenet days, which is why I got online in the first place. There's always been a need for anonymity and for marginalized groups to communicate and interface online. And there's a lot of people trapped on Twitter right now. Like, I got off because I just found it really untenable. But there are
Mm-hmm.
people who don't have that privilege. They don't have the luxury of getting off. There's a huge swath of kind of the black community that has really found a voice there, that they can't just they can't just bail on Twitter. They have nowhere else to go. I say the same, unfortunately, for a lot of people in the trans community. So those people need Twitter, but they're on a platform that is openly antagonistic towards them. And I think it's a really interesting and pivotal problem that we're having right now.
Yeah, it is scary on there, but it's like you said, it's kind of like there are people who, where are you going to go? Because I know journalists, that's where they found jobs, was on Twitter, and now it's like, well,
Well, and that's a whole other issue. The whole other
yeah.
issue is the ransacking of labor that's
Hmm.
happened as a result of this purchase, which is a completely different and bad aspect of it. So yeah.
Yeah. Thank you so much for talking with me today.